Let's get some analysis now from Alexander Crowther. He's a senior fellow at the Center for European Policy Analysis and joins us also from Washington, D.C. Thank you so much for being with us on the program. So Putin says that this 30-day ceasefire essentially needs to lead to lasting peace. But what does lasting peace look like for Putin? What are some of the conditions he's going to put on the table?
So Putin said the idea itself is correct, and we certainly support it, but it has to address root causes. So they have four major requirements. Number one is that the Ukrainians turn over all four of the provinces that the Russians have partial control over in the Donbas region and recognize Russian sovereignty over it. Denazification, which means a new regime. Neutralization means they can't join NATO. And demilitarization, which means Ukraine can't have a military. None of those are acceptable to Ukraine.
Right, and a 30-day ceasefire would essentially be the start of a new chapter in the war in Ukraine. But as you say, you sound a bit more pessimistic than the White House does at the moment in terms of Ukraine accepting these conditions. But if Trump does manage to get both sides to agree to the ceasefire, what would that mean for the future of the war in Ukraine and the position that Trump would hold in this conflict?
Well, each side would rush to resupply. Neither one trusts the other. And honestly, Putin isn't winning the war, but he thinks he can win the peace by trying to manipulate Donald Trump. Putin will sign anything and then violate it. The Budapest Memorandum in 1994, Minsk 1 and 2, the Intermediate Range Nuclear Force Treaty. And so he'll say whatever he has to say to keep Donald Trump happy, but he is going to continue to pursue his goals.
And I guess this is one of the reasons why that Ukraine has been insisting for those security guarantees, not just for Ukraine, but for the EU as well. Where does the EU stand in these talks?
The EU is not invited to participate in the talks, but the EU strongly supports Ukraine because they believe that if Russia wins in Ukraine, it's just the beginning. And probably next would be the Baltic states, who are members of both the EU and NATO. And things would go bad for the modern European system, where everybody has agreed that you don't violate borders and you don't change borders through force. And so this is just as existential for the European Union as it is for Ukraine.
There's this notion within the White House that Ukraine has to make some concessions at this point. What do you think would be acceptable for Ukraine to engage in those peace talks to lead to an everlasting peace in the region? And what are some of the security guarantees would they need?
Security guarantees, they would prefer to be in NATO, but they've got to have something. Since Budapest and Minsk 1 and 2 all failed at the hands of the Russians, they're terrified. And so they're looking at perhaps European forces on the ground might be acceptable. And regarding the territory, they could let the Russians continue to hold territory that they do hold now without recognizing it as Russian territory. That would be kind of in the middle, without giving up recognizing Russian sovereignty over it or giving up Ukrainian sovereignty over it, but recognizing the fact that they don't have the capability to kick the Russians out of there.
Okay, Alexander Crowther, thank you so much for being with me here on Tier 2 World and sharing that insight with us. I appreciate it.
Thank you.